right, we're on. All right, so Selenium. Got a couple of name drops yesterday in various sessions. So I was staying on the down low yesterday, poke my head out. So. Anyway, yeah, so I'm the original author, but now as time goes on, my contribution to the project gets less and less as more people come in and refactor ugly code that I may have written in the past, or build add-ons, anything, something like that. So just a show of hands, I'm still a little curious. How many people are aware of Selenium or have used Selenium? Oh, gee, okay. I thought it was about half. It's a little more than half. So maybe I don't need to do so much tutorial stuff. Well, I'll do some of that stuff anyway because I have to wave hi to my mom on the video. Okay, so let me just get to the slides and then get past that and then get to the actual stuff. So there's a problem. The problem is complexity. And this was my complex problem that led to the development of Selenium. For the our in-house time and expense application that I wrote with a team of other ThoughtWorkers, we at ThoughtWorks, a very unruly bunch, and you can't just say use Internet Explorer. We give them Dells, and you say use your Dell, and they go ahead and buy Macs. So we have to support kind of Safari and Firefox and Internet Explorer, just from the user base. Then also from a kind of development mindset, we would have developers who would only do stuff in Firefox and check it in, and then the next week we'd find out it's broken in IE and vice versa. And so this is a very complex thing. And this was, so when we created Selenium, this was a year before Ajax. So this was back when the days when JavaScript was bad. We had a lot of Java developers on this, so Java good, JavaScript bad. And so Selenium actually, it took a couple of aborted attempts, finally was able to convince somebody, no, JavaScript is good. And so that's why Selenium, I think, was in this weird right place at the right time, because it grappled this problem, which only now, since JavaScript is good, people care about this stuff. And then also these other things at the bottom. Later on, people didn't really like the original format of Selenium, so they want to be able to write their tests in Ruby and Python and Perl and Java and C#, be able to use it on any different kind of framework, and all these different kinds of things. So we kind of try to distill down all this complexity into a relatively simple tool, but nothing's ever that simple. So just to repeat, yeah, how do you test your web app? On all platforms, browsers, web frameworks, and regardless of implementation language or the language you want to write your tests in, which sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. So the solution, of course, automate it. So we're all here. How? With Selenium, of course, with a couple of nifty bits that I'll show you. So Selenium is actually a minor player in all this stuff I'll be showing you today. So actually, I'm going to a little bit of a context. The ingredients I'm going to show you. I had two kind of converging ideas, but the main one is I kind of wanted to see if you could use Selenium to build. Oh, let me show it. Let me ask a question. Has anyone heard of these sites called like BrowserCam.com, SiteVista.com, BrowserShots.com? Anybody rings a bell? Okay. So you give these sites a URL, and they give you a screenshot back of that page, and you actually can select from a grid, like, oh, I want to see Firefox on Linux and Safari, whatever, or Mosaic on Windows 95, or some wacky thing. It's interesting. I'm sitting back there and I saw that, and I'm like, oh wow, that'd be cool. If you gave it a Selenium test, you can not only just take one screenshot of one URL, you could say, take a screenshot. Oh, then now go click here, type that, then take another screenshot. Or maybe not do that, just record a movie. And then taking that idea towards its absurd conclusion, there's this convergence of idea in the sense that writing tests is very boring. There's very little payoff. But this tangent I'm trying to bring together, all the cool kids are doing screencasts for their projects. I think I was wowed, like everybody else, when they first saw the movie for Ruby on Rails. Granted, I don't think you can probably script that all through Selenium, but I have this idea that kind of one step down the road of literate functional tests or story tests, actually making your, I guess in this case, your Selenium tests executable documentation. So your documentation that you deliver to the client, if you make it easy to read enough that you don't have to spend another week making a screencast. Actually, every time you check in, you get a compiled screencast in Safari, Firefox, and IE. So that's what I tried and mostly got working for this talk. So, these are all the ingredients to this idea that I have somewhat working on my computer. So, Apple MacBook. So, interesting story about this. I didn't own one until last month. My top proposal was to, this other converging idea, now that Macs are Intel-based, you can run all these different platforms on them. And I had that originally, that problem of needing to test Safari, Firefox, and Internet Explorer. Well, a Mac Mini or a MacBook actually would solve that problem. So yeah, I didn't own a MacBook, so I got accepted to this talk saying I'm going to be using a Mac. So this is basically the subtext. This is the way to, I got my wife to agree to let me buy a Mac. So I did try to actually do all this work with a stock MacBook, but with 512 megs of RAM. But that, the second I put on one extra virtual machine, everything was crazy. So 2 gigs of RAM. That if anyone wants to repeat this at home, go out and buy RAM because it doesn't come with enough. Well, for all this crazy stuff I want to do. So the next thing, Parallels Desktop, virtualization software, and I guess VMware is close on their trail. Now, granted, if you didn't care about Macs and Safari, you could do all of this stuff just using VMware. Actually, that's one concern about this, is that I like being able to use, it would be nice to develop here and then to take a virtual machine, deploy that on a server. It's not quite easy because Parallels has their own standard. They're not quite interoperable between all the different VM formats yet, so that's one little side note there. One other little bit in my bag of tricks. Just this summer, a couple other thought workers based in the UK put together a Knoppix-based distribution called Buildix, and it's a tightly integrated. It's not really supposed to compete with all the other big Linux distributions, but it's nice, tightly integrated cruise control, track, and subversion. And me being the JavaScript and Python guy, I'm deathly afraid of Java. So I've actually avoided cruise control for all these years because I thought, oh, that's a Java thing. And then there's BuildBot, I guess, in the Python community, but BuildBot looks ugly, so I'm just kind of stuck. Cruise control actually does look okay, but now that they put that in a virtual machine, I don't care that it's anything. I have to edit a couple of ant files, which are, it's bearable, but all I have to do is just install into a virtual machine and use it and run, and it works, and it's nice. So that's actually kind of the radar traffic control of the brains in this little thing I'm going to show you. Also, of course, Selenium. There's many aspects of Selenium, confuses people, but I'll be showing you a little bit of the Selenium IDE for Firefox. That's the record playback tool, which may or may not be useful or good, but it actually does record playback. We did notice a huge spike in interest in the project, even though some testing experts might say record playback is evil, bad, but you have to kind of go where your users are, and your users start with record playback. So at least you get them hooked, and then you can lead them on the trail of writing better tests. And then also we have this kind of advanced version, Selenium Remote Control Server, and that lets you, it's a Java proxy server. Again, I didn't write it, but the cool thing about it is that it's a proxy, so you can write your tests in Perl. Well, you guys all know this, but Perl, Python, Ruby, Java, C#. Proxies the requests over HTTP, gets and posts, and then it knows how to launch various browsers and configure them so pop-ups don't show up and things like that. I'll just show you briefly remote control. And then, of course, Python. I don't know why it needed really its own slide, but it was very cool for this little automated screencast thing. PyVNC to Swift is very strong sauce, I guess is the phrase, and Elementary. It was stupid simple to take an RSS feed and get the parts that I needed. So, I'll show you a little bit of my setup here. And I'll actually go back to showing you Firefox IDE, some of the bigger parts of the toolkit. I'll just do this. So I've got this setup. So this is a plugin called Virtue Desktops. So it lets me have 6 virtual screens. I've got 4 virtual machines running. So I've got 2 just Windows for my Mac stuff. But I've got Buildix running in its own screen. Then I have Django, which is running on Ubuntu server. Now, this is different than I think the way Buildix kind of has been described. I actually set up my own test server with the Django Web Framework, and then I have SSH connections back and forth between Buildix and Django. So this is interesting because then I actually could take that virtual machine, it's very uncorrupted by the Buildix parts, and I could actually put that on a developer, give that to a developer and say, here you go, here's your developer playground. Or maybe not using Parallels with VMware, this could then, I'm deploying to this virtual image, but if it was marked good, I could probably, in simple matter of programming, perhaps use that as my production box in a VM grid kind of a thing. So I wanted to separate out the build software from the actual test framework server. And then I've got 2 desktop operating systems. I got Ubuntu Desktop, and I got Windows XP. And also, it's not really down here, but behind the scenes, I've got a second concurrent user of Mac OS. It'll be doing the screencasts in that user account, so it won't be taking up my screen here. So just do the quick flyby, because this thing is so cool. That's Buildix, really it's just running headless, so it's really nothing. Same with, Django, nothing interesting. This is interesting. Anyway, so I got a full Ubuntu desktop, and interesting. Oh, I hope that doesn't come back to haunt me. Yeah, I've got on Ubuntu, and then on the Mac user, something interesting. That doesn't come back. These permanent loops going on, listening for check-ins on the Buildix box. And if it doesn't work, then my demo is not going to be so great. Yeah, well, I got some pre-canned movies in there, so maybe I'll show you those instead. Then we got Windows, and not much to say about that. Anyway, so that's the setup. Now I'll briefly just show you what Selenium looks like, for those who don't know. So it demos well. Anyway, so I'll just click all, run. And this is it just doing its thing. This is the original version that I can lay claim to, like the layout. And the whole thing was, I liked Fit, but I didn't like the fact that it just did stuff behind the scenes. And I said, oh, I did it all and it worked. And I'm like, really? So I originally actually emailed Ward Cunningham saying, hey, no one's written Fit for the JavaScript framework. So I'm going to do that. But then I realized the action fixtures, I was forking the spec because I needed clicks and verifies and sucks and different things like that. So anyway, so it was kind of inspired by Fit, but then became its own thing. And as you can see, it can handle, well, I thought it could handle pop-ups. I guess it can't handle closing in this demo. But all the things that Ajax is, yeah, not too many tools can do this. And so, yeah, this was actually running in Safari, which I don't think any vendor can do. There might be some open source tools. But anyway, so that's just it by itself. That was the original version. Now let me show you actually the Firefox IDE. Well, I'll just first show you the little Django app. Let me close this. I'll get monitor on again. Okay, this is your administrative interface. Maybe I don't want to record just yet. Keep things simple. This is my IP connections. Right down. All right. Okay. So I was going to show you the Django application. That looks like it's not working, so let's move along. I will show you the Selenium IDE, and I perhaps at least to record a couple of things on the login screen. I swear it was all working in 10 seconds ago. So it's recording everything. So it records the URL, the base URL, and in fact I typed nothing into those user fields. I can type admin tab out, click login. I guess it's going to hang. So interesting. So this is, again, kind of, I guess the technical term for this kind of style of test would be keyword-driven test. Maybe if you squint your eyes, you could say it's a domain-specific language. I don't know. But the fatal flaw, I think, to this kind of format is that the source code is HTML, and that's ugly. And I hate ANT, so I have a little bit of a dueling double think logic there, that I hate ANT, yet this is okay. So it's fine because in this format you actually can write, I think, stealing the ideas from Ward. I guess I didn't really think much more. I figured, oh, Ward liked it, so sure. He made the argument you could write these tests in Word, tables, or Excel, and this is nice for business analysts and things like that. So I said, okay, yeah, sure. And also, because it's so stupid simple, it's easy to compile down from Java to this. So a lot of actually people in the very first kind of months of Selenium, they didn't like the tables. They used JSPs or PHP to compile down to the HTML tables. It was pretty simple. But since then, you actually can record actually in any format. But we have this interesting thing in the Selenium IDE. You actually can change the format to the supported languages we have for RC. So not too many people know this. I think they see Selenium HTML tables and all of that stuff, and then RC is really hard to set up, and how do you go from tables to Java? Well, you actually could record your test here, and then just translate. It's got some regex stuff behind the scenes to Perl, and of course my favorite. So yeah, it's interesting. So then you can cut and paste this into a proper IDE and start massaging this down into a real test. Another reason why people didn't like so much the HTML tests, I wonder if I can get back here. They're not Turing complete. It's an imperative language, and you can do one step at a time thing. Kind of regressing, I guess, is state-of-the-art languages. The true test, or the true proof that this was kind of wacky, was when someone submitted the go-to keyword or commands to the project and saying, oh, we need loops, so here's a go-to function. You're like, go-to previously? No. So we very deliberately have kept Celanese, I guess it's called, a stupid language. Because if we added ifs and loops, and well, behind the scenes, it would start to look like ANT. But then also because it's a hierarchical structure, I'd also be fulfilling Greenspun's, I'm implementing Lisp all over again. But, yeah. What was that? Yes. So one of the other things I'm actually playing with, but it's not fully baked, is some step between full-scale Java, Ruby, whatever, and these HTMLs, actually being able to just write your tests in just straight JavaScript. But that's not so easy because JavaScript, as Joe was pointing out yesterday, it's single-threaded, so you can't run JavaScript and then stop, like when you say, go open this page. You can do that through Ajax, but you can't do it in the actual window. So, well, if you're interested in writing your tests in JavaScript, come find me later. But it's an interesting engineering task. So anyway, so that's some of the things. I'll just briefly show you if I can get to it. I'm just going to show you some of the. There they are. Some of the syntax, I guess, for the remote control. So you actually can write it in the full unit test framework using the same kind of API in Python, Java, C#, Ruby. The Ruby example isn't advanced. Like Java server spaces, I think is going to page, just Ajax, and then Perl. So those things. So I had promised Paul Hammett that I would at least cover remote control at some point in the talk today. So there you go, Paul. All right, so now on to this crazy stuff that I wanted to do. So here's the flow. We actually called Chris Briesmeister and Andy Dabrowski in Chicago working on the project WEA, and they have Selenium well integrated into their whole continuous integration environment, and they call it the two-tier flow. Sorry, I don't have a slide, but I'll just gesticulate. They've got cruise control build automation number 1 up here on the top of the stack, tier 1, and then tier 2 is your functional test stuff, your Selenium stuff. So the way the basic flow is, developer checks into Cruise Control 1, that runs unit tests, and then that deploys a test server, which then triggers a second tier build. And it's important to do a second tier build because developers only care about unit tests. So you want to give them the feedback right away. And also, functional tests are slow, so that's a good kind of place to cut it. That second tier, actually, I think on their project, it launches the browsers and does those things. My architecture is a little bit different in what I want to do today. And going with the mind of the browsershots.org, I kind of like their idea, where you've got these servers, but somewhere on the other side of the planet, you've got desktops that will phone home and see if there's a request and do it for you. So, so I have that kind of a two-tier thing. But actually, that second tier is really listeners on the desktops waiting for a new successful build from building. So let's actually not go here. Let me show the BuildX on page. Yay! All right, at least that works. All right. So this is your BuildX starting page. Let me maximize this. It's pretty nifty. It gives you some user management goodies, I hope. Oh, I hope I wasn't looking at a cached page. I may have. Mistakes. Don't know why. Okay, yeah, this is really crummy. All right, so I'll have to do more charades here. What was that?
Did you plug into that?
Did I plug in?
Did you plug into that?
No, I've actually got my own little virtual network right here. So what I've actually seen happen before is if the cable gets on a power cord, it heats up and it loses the connections, or it unplugs. The first thing to ask. Okay, bear with me for a second. Yeah, tell the buzzkill there, sir. Yay! All right, we're back on. Okay, cruise control. This is what I want to show you. Yes. All right. Status page. They also have a nifty little cruise control widget. Subtext for this talk, it's cool to buy a Mac. Anyway. So yes, so I won't play around with the dashboard too much, but this is good enough for now. So BuildX comes with a couple projects, math, config, stuff like that. So I've got two builds here basically. T, time expense application, that was the name of the whole project. And then T screens for recording the screen casts. I have my build actually for the purpose of the demo, as long as my cables are plugged in, to check every 10 seconds. You might not want to do that on a real project. But anyway, so just keep this in mind. I'm actually going to trigger a build. I'm not going to go and do a test driven or actually edit code in the interest of time. But anyway, just keep this in mind. TEA19. If I click on the home page, you can actually go back and look at all the builds. The previous builds kind of hard to see. But yeah, all I did was hit build trigger.txt to trigger a build. So I'm going to go trigger another build. And hopefully TEA19 will go to TEA20. I can find it. I'm just going to change some white space. The developer tools, it's kind of interesting. I really miss Tortoise SVN. Just being able to be plugged right into Internet or Windows Explorer. They don't have that, so this is serviceable. So I'm going to commit my build trigger.txt, triggering another build. All right, now let's go check cruise control fast. Aha, it's already caught it. And hit, building. And it's done. And it failed. Probably because of the IP addresses again. So let's go take a look at what happened. Actually, I can just click in down there. It failed. No root to host. So good thing I have some pre-canned stuff in there. So let me actually show you what that build was. It was pretty simple because I wanted to keep it simple. Whoop, wrong here. Go to the source repository for the project. And cruise control build. Very simple stuff. I actually try to use Ant as least as possible. So I SSH into my Django host and do an Apache stop. You guys can see that. Then I do really ugly stuff. SSH in there again and do a version update. Then I run some kick off a Python database refresh script, and then I restart Apache. So since my IP addresses are messed up, the build failed. But what should have happened is meanwhile, on the virtual machine branch, I would have had this listening guy. I guess you can scroll up here. Yeah, he was waiting for quite a while. At some point in the past when I was testing. And maybe I'll virtually show you what was going to happen. Stunt demos here. All right. It was waiting, and then it found, I used the RSS feed of cruise control, all the build status, and looked specifically for a passing build. Then that actually then triggers off the screencast stuff. So then that calls PyVNC to Swift. And that was interesting because PyVNC to Swift is a screen capture recording tool, but I found out in the course of trying to do this demo that it doesn't have a timeout. So I actually had to hack in some, launch this process and launch another process listening on that process to kill that process in 30 seconds. That wasn't fun. So, and I actually couldn't even get it working in Windows in time for this demo today. That's why I just kept zooming past this one because I didn't get the screencast in time. But I did get it working in Ubuntu, and I did get it working in Safari. Yeah, so just counts down, then it writes the file, and it actually commits the file to the repository, and then it waits and waits and waits again. So actually, let me show you some of those movies that are out there. Go away. T-screens. We can look at the timeline. So after a build, then eventually these screenshots these screencasts get checked back in. So I had a user named Mac. He got access to update the Safari screencast. I wonder if any of these are good. Actually looks pretty ugly going straight in from here. Original format. I forgot to turn that. Yeah, anyway, so it actually records the movie, and then, yeah, this is me trying to get ready. I'm actually just running through tests. And I actually looked through it at Ubuntu one as well. Yeah, this wasn't that interesting. Ideally, I would have had a test of that Django application, wrote it through the IDE, checked that in, and then see these virtual machines record that same test in those various browsers on those platforms and check those in, and then all you'd have to do is, when you commit it, then go straight back into track and then just wait for the movie to show up. So this is, all these things just to kind of give you kind of backdrop. Of course, Selenium is pretty stable, been around for 2 years. I think actually 2-year anniversary was like last week, I think. all this stuff I'm showing you is kind of like mad scientist, research and development kind of things, trying to get going. So this is kind of flaky. But it's an extension of what is possible when you use things like Selenium. And and when you embrace something like this, when you start with a screencast and you work backwards from that, I guess you have to kind of agree that a screencast might be useful. Maybe this particular one isn't that useful. But you use your documentation. So David Hansen, every time he comes out with a new nifty version of Rails, he doesn't have to go and do those things. Also, taking it one step further, Macs, especially, yet another reason to buy a Mac, because it's cool, has really good speech synthesis. So if you can imagine, again, another thing I would love to have done in time today, but something that's actually made possible by the fact that of Selenium remote control. When it's on the server side, you can go do a server-side process, and then you can do something in the browser, or do something on the client. You do different things. So as an example of that, perhaps you could actually tie in the voice synthesis from Apple and make an actual more interesting screencast. So imagine, close your eyes. So imagine going to the front page. Can you hear? Can you hear that? Well, that was my, well, the sound's over. It's farther down. I could do it again. But use your imagination in the sense that you could use voice synthesis, and the next, no, it's okay. Yeah, it's fine. Coming in, I saw the Steve Jobs demo of Leopard coming up next year. This voice synthesis is even better. Actually, you can't tell it's a robot. So imagine recording this to MP3 concurrent to the running of the tests. And if you use Selenium remote control, you can time it specifically. Cue the sound, wait for that to be done, then do a couple of interesting commands to the screen. And also, if you go again with the focus of doing it through screencasts, you keep your tests, yes, they're brittle, but then also your documentation, and you don't want your documentation, you want your documentation to be brittle. But also because people potentially will use this, potentially, if you do it right, this could be a good example as like a marketing tool. You will write short, pithy tests. And so, kind of going down this track, you might actually make the argument that you probably use Selenium the least, but it's flashy stuff. Like the actual testing of your business logic, you would be doing it like the protocol layer or somewhere else. And unit tests, of course, millions of them. And this would be kind of the flashy stuff that you could automate. Those are the things. Yeah, without the IP, I could go hunt down there, but I would really kind of kill the buzz here. So perhaps a little bit early, but I can open it to questions and discussion. Anthony Mercano, testingreflections.com.
Hi Jason, thanks for the announcement. Well, as you know, I've been using Selenium for a while, and I'm very, very inspired by what you've done today. I think I have a feeling that maybe in a couple of years' time, this will be sort of some sort of multi-million-pound business that we can all submit our requirements, and you'll go off and generate these videos for us.
Unfortunately, no, I can't. We haven't figured out how to make money on it because it's open sourced. So, and I just told you how to do it. So no.
I'm sure there'll be a way.
Yeah.
Talk to me afterwards. Anyway, what I'm interested to find out is, obviously these videos can get quite big.
Yes.
And if you're doing this as part of every build,
checking it into track especially or not track, Subversion is a terrible idea. It was the simplest thing that could work. Is that your question?
Well, yeah, exactly
Okay.
what I was getting to, for the time being, obviously they're quite big. Can you see a way of this actually being perhaps used just on an overnight basis, and so I could come in the morning, for example, and I can just say, right, I had the build failed, and it failed because one of my Selenium tests failed. Okay, I'm going to go play back that video now. And do you think that's going to be manageable for a lot of applications in terms of integration with Subversion and/or disk space and storage and so on?
Honestly, I have no idea. but I went with the simplest thing that could work. I knew the protocol, it's WebDAV, and it was check out, check in, all of the authentication was just all there. But yeah, because Subversion stores every copy of it, you might only want the last one. And also there's something else that someone brought up. You only want really to see these if they failed. I mean, who's going to just watch it run again that it passed? Well, if you go with the thought that your potential users as a marketing tool, those are useful. But yeah, something better would have been to maybe FTP it overlay, something like that. Those are things I'm still trying to figure out. I really like the Atom API. For, again, thinking of kind of a distributed grid of having computers all over the world kind of checking in, doing the recordings, and that's a good standard that I'm really kind of eagerly following. But as far as actually what's going to be best on the server side of where things get stored, I don't know. Yeah, buy a big hard drive.
I think what you've done is really cool, and it's innovative, and I think it's got great potential, so don't give up, and I hope we see this, the complete version of the talk in another conference very soon.
Hi, this is Ryan Campbell with Red Hat over here. Yeah. So one need I think a lot of people have is for ensuring visual consistency between different browsers so that it generally looks the same across browsers, right? So one way to kind of extend what you're doing and incorporate kind of the small multiples of EverTuft is to like take these screencasts and put them in a grid and play them together, all platforms playing at once, right? To allow you to kind of see how the platforms differ visually and let you zoom in on ones that are aberrant or something like that. So just kind of a cool idea to build on top of that, see the cross-platform visuals.
Yeah, actually very cool. I thought put it up on the screen during a party, psychedelic. Yeah. No, it's a good idea. Thanks. Any other questions? We're in the final stretch here, so I'm amazed I don't see too many people sleeping. Yeah, Addy.
Addy from a small company with head office in Chicago you may have heard of. What's the most complicated application of this that people have done in production?
What's the most complicated? I don't know. I haven't seen them. I know we have lots of name drop without name dropping. Any Fortune 500 companies are using Selenium in their products, and I don't know if I can actually mention any of them, but yeah, we've got some very interesting. Yeah, talk to me later. But I know there's big companies, so if you can go with the logic that big companies have big applications, and they were actually coming after us to see if we could provide support contracts to them for that, then I guess ergo, it's being used in a complex application. But I have to go track those down for you. Probably the least used is the Django interface.
The other question is, how maintainable is this in the long run?
How maintainable?
It has really changes, will rebrand.
How maintainable are Selenium tests? Answer that in a couple ways. The HTML tests themselves, because like fit tests or fit style, they're unmaintainable because you can't oh yeah, because they're not Turing complete. I'm not sure if I made that point. Or I guess I did. You can't do if loops or ifs, loops, refactoring into functions and common stuff. So those are maintainable, unmaintainable, but they're good enough. It's in small doses. If you use Selenium remote control and then you write it in Java, then it's as maintainable as anything else in Java, or as not maintainable as someone might say. But
So I meant what happens when the GUI changes?
the GUI changes. Well, right, tests are brittle. I'm making kind of the contrarian point, though, that when you deliver documentation, that's like the bane of everyone. So we have developers, testers, but then don't forget the guys who document stuff, because I think they're kind of the third forgotten stepchild of software development. The people who have to document all this stuff. There's always that problem between the docs being out of date from the code. In that sense, you want to couple the documentation to the code. You want it to be brittle. When the code changes, that changes. Otherwise, you don't know. I mean, that's a big complaint about a lot of open source projects. Oh yeah, found the documentation, but it's 10 years old. So you kind of go with this trade-off. It's going to be brittle, but then maybe in that sense, you use it less for the things that need to be brittle, the documentation. But for stuff like you're testing your business logic, yeah, I learned the hard way. I used, when we first made Selenium. Selenium was the all-being functional testing tool. Everything that was not the unit test library was Selenium. And I think I've realized that over time, I'm using it less and less and less, but for more interesting things. So I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. Yeah, use it less, and then makes it easier.
All right, Jason, thanks very much.
Thank you.